What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a daytime talk show and everything goes completely sideways? What starts as a friendly conversation about his latest project turns into one of the most explosive moments in television history. George Clooney, known for keeping his cool in every situation, finds himself in a battle of words that nobody saw coming. This isn't your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This is something entirely different. And by the end of it, security is involved, cameras are cutting, and the audience is left absolutely stunned. Before we get into exactly what happened, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about celebrities speaking their minds on live television. The stage is set on a typical morning at The View. The audience is buzzing with excitement because George Clooney is scheduled to appear promoting his new film about investigative journalism. The lights are bright, the cameras are rolling, and the hosts are in their usual seats. Joy Behar is particularly animated today, shuffling through her notes with a slight smirk on her face. She has a reputation for asking tough questions, and today seems no different. Whoopi Goldberg introduces George with her characteristic warmth, and he walks out to thunderous applause, waving to the crowd with that famous smile. He takes his seat, adjusts his microphone, and the interview begins smoothly enough. Whoopi starts with the easy questions. She asks about the film, about working with the cast, about the challenges of directing and acting simultaneously. George is charming and articulate, giving thoughtful answers that have the audience engaged. He talks about the importance of journalism in today's world, about holding power accountable, about the responsibility that comes with having a platform. The other hosts nod along, asking follow-up questions that keep the conversation flowing naturally. Everything seems perfectly normal, but then Joy leans forward, and there's something different in her expression. She's been quiet for the first 10 minutes, letting the others lead, but now it's her turn. Joy clears her throat and says, "You know, George, I find it interesting that you're promoting a film about journalistic integrity when you've been pretty selective about which issues you speak out on." George's smile doesn't fade, but there's a slight pause. He tilts his head and responds, "I'm not sure I follow. What do you mean by selective?" Joy doesn't miss a beat. She says, "Well, you're very vocal about certain political issues, certain causes, but when it comes to others, you seem to go quiet. Don't you think that's a bit hypocritical for someone who's making a movie about speaking truth to power?" The energy in the studio shifts immediately. The audience goes quiet. The other hosts exchange glances. George's expression changes from friendly to guarded in an instant. He takes a breath and says, "Joy, I think everyone has the right to choose which issues they're passionate about. I don't think speaking about some things and not others makes someone a hypocrite. I think it makes them human." Joy nods slowly, but she's not backing down. She replies, "But when you have the platform you have, don't you think silence on certain issues is actually a statement in itself? Doesn't your silence speak volumes?" George shifts in his seat. His jaw tightens just slightly. He says, "I could ask you the same question, Joy. You have a platform, too. Are you speaking about every single issue that matters, or are you also choosing your battles?" Joy laughs, but it's not a warm laugh. She says, "The difference is, I'm not making a movie pretending to be the champion of truth-telling while cherry-picking what truths I want to tell." George's eyes narrow. The audience gasps softly. This is escalating faster than anyone expected. Whoopi tries to interject, saying, "Okay, let's maybe take a step back here. George, tell us more about the actual filmmaking process." But Joy isn't finished. She talks over Whoopi slightly and says, "No, I think this is important. I think our audience deserves to know why someone who claims to care so deeply about accountability seems to avoid accountability themselves." George leans forward now, his voice calm but firm. He says, "Joy, I came here to talk about a film. A film that took 3 years to make. A film that dozens of people poured their hearts into. If you want to have a political debate, that's fine, but maybe you should tell your guests that beforehand instead of ambushing them on live television." The word ambush hangs in the air. Joy's face flushes slightly. She says, "Ambush? This is The View, George. We ask real questions here. We don't just lob softballs so celebrities can promote their projects. If you can't handle a real conversation, maybe you shouldn't be making films about journalism." George's composure is cracking now. He says, "I can handle any conversation, Joy. What I can't handle is someone twisting my words and assigning motives to me that don't exist. You don't know me. You don't know what I do privately, what causes I support, what conversations I have behind closed doors. Joy fires back immediately. She says, then tell us, George. Tell us right now what you're doing. What are these private causes? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you only speak up when it's convenient, when it helps your image, when it doesn't cost you anything. George's voice rises slightly, still controlled, but with an edge. He says, you want to know what I do privately? The definition of private is that it's not public, Joy. I don't need to perform my values for you or anyone else. I don't need a camera on me every time I write a check or make a phone call or have a difficult conversation. That's the difference between doing something because you care and doing something for applause. The tension is now unbearable. The other hosts are silent. The audience is frozen. Joy's face is red and she leans even further forward. She says, so now I'm the one performing? I've been fighting for causes my entire career, George. I've been speaking truth to power since before you were famous. Don't you dare sit there and lecture me about authenticity. George stands up suddenly, not aggressively, but definitively. He says, I'm not lecturing you about anything. But I'm also not going to sit here and be accused of being a fraud by someone who clearly invited me here just to attack me. Whoopi stands too, trying to calm things down. She says, George, Joy, let's all just take a breath here. We can have disagreements without it getting personal. But George is already removing his microphone. He says, this isn't a disagreement, Whoopi. This is a setup. I respect you. I respect this show, but I'm not doing this. Joy stands now as well, her voice loud. She says, oh, so when it gets tough, you just walk away. That's exactly what I'm talking about, George. You only want to engage when it's easy. George stops and turns back to face her. His voice is ice cold. He says, Joy, I've been to war zones. I've sat across from dictators. I've had guns pointed at me while trying to help people. Don't you ever tell me I only engage when it's easy. The studio is in complete chaos now. Producers are rushing onto the set. The audience doesn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. Joy isn't backing down. She says, then prove it, George. Stay here and finish this conversation. Defend your positions instead of running away. George looks at her for a long moment, and then he looks at the camera. He says, I don't have to prove anything to you, Joy, and I certainly don't have to subject myself to this kind of ambush journalism masquerading as daytime television. He turns to walk off the set, and that's when Joy says something that makes him stop in his tracks. She says, your wife must be so proud of how you handle confrontation. The entire studio gasps. Even the other hosts look shocked. George turns around slowly, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. George stands frozen for a moment, his hands still on the microphone pack at his waist. The color has drained from his face, replaced by a kind of controlled fury that makes the entire studio hold its breath. He walks back toward the table slowly, deliberately, and when he speaks, his voice is quiet but cutting. He says, what did you just say? Joy seems to realize she's crossed a line, but instead of backing down, she doubles down. She says, I'm just saying that someone who claims to be so principled should be able to handle a difficult conversation without storming off set. George's hands are trembling slightly now. He says, you just brought my wife into this. My wife, who has nothing to do with any of this. Do you understand how far over the line you just went? Whoopi steps between them physically now, her hands up. She says, Joy, that was inappropriate. George, I apologize on behalf of the show. But Joy isn't having it. She says, oh, come on, Whoopi. His wife is a public figure. She's a human rights lawyer who speaks out all the time. I'm sure she has opinions about her husband's selective activism. George's voice rises now. No longer calm, he says, you don't get to speculate about my marriage on national television. You don't get to drag my wife into your petty attempt to score points. This has nothing to do with her, and you know it. Joy crosses her arms. She says, everything is connected, George. You can't compartmentalize your life when you're a public figure making political films. Your choices reflect on everyone around you, including your family. George laughs, but it's bitter. He says, so now you're an expert on my family. You've met my wife maybe twice at events, exchanged pleasantries, and now you think you can speak about our relationship, about what she thinks, about what we discuss privately. The arrogance is unbelievable. One of the other hosts, Alyssa, tries to interject. She says, maybe we should go to commercial and everyone can cool down. But the director seems frozen. The cameras keep rolling and Joy keeps pushing. She says, I'm not claiming to be an expert on your family, George. I'm saying that your public persona doesn't match your public actions, and that inconsistency is worth discussing. George shakes his head, his voice dripping with frustration. He says, no, Joy. What you're doing is trying to create a moment. You're trying to go viral. You're trying to manufacture controversy, because that's what this show has become. It's not about real conversations anymore. It's about gotcha moments and clickbait headlines. Joy's face flushes deeper red. She says, how dare you? This show has been having real conversations for decades. We were doing this when you were still on sitcoms, George. George points at her, his fingers shaking slightly. He says, and somewhere along the way, you lost the plot. You stopped being interested in understanding people and started being interested in tearing them down. That's not journalism, Joy. That's not even good television. It's just cruelty dressed up as righteousness. The audience is murmuring now, some people nodding, others looking uncomfortable. Joy slams her hand on the table. She says, cruelty? You want to talk about cruelty? How about the cruelty of having a platform and refusing to use it? How about the cruelty of silence when people are suffering? George steps closer to the table, leaning on it with both hands. He says, I have used my platform, Joy, for decades. I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars for causes I believe in. I've testified before Congress. I've put my career on the line more times than I can count. But because I don't perform every single act of charity on social media, because I don't issue a statement about every single issue, you've decided I'm a fraud. Joy stands up again, matching his intensity. She says, then tell me, George, tell me right now. Why haven't you spoken about certain issues? Why the selective silence? Give me a real answer. George straightens up, his voice cold and measured. He says, because, Joy, some issues are so complex and so sensitive that speaking without full knowledge is irresponsible. Because sometimes the best thing you can do is listen and support people who are directly affected rather than centering yourself in the conversation. Because not every problem needs a celebrity spokesperson. Because I'm not a politician or a policy expert. I'm an actor and a filmmaker, and I try to use those skills where they can actually make a difference. Joy scoffs. She says, that's a convenient excuse. George's eyes flash. He says, it's not an excuse. It's called humility. It's called recognizing your limitations. Maybe you should try it sometime. The audience gasps again. Whoopi says firmly, okay, that's enough. Both of you need to stop right now. But Joy is on a roll. She says, humility from the man who lectures everyone about politics at award shows. From the man who compares directors to journalists and acts like making movies is some kind of public service. George laughs harshly. He says, I have never compared myself to a journalist. I've said that journalists are vital to democracy and that we should support them. There's a difference, Joy, but I'm not surprised you can't see it. Joy's voice gets louder. She says, you know what, George? I think the real issue here is that you can't handle being questioned by a woman who doesn't fall at your feet. You're used to everyone treating you like Hollywood royalty, and the second someone challenges you, you fall apart. George's face changes. He says quietly, do not make this about gender. Don't you dare. This has nothing to do with you being a woman, and everything to do with you being hostile and unprofessional. I've been challenged by plenty of women, including some of the toughest journalists in the world, and I've never walked off an interview. He adds, but those were actual interviews, Joy, not ambushes designed to humiliate. Joy throws her hands up. She says, here we go with the ambush accusation again. You were invited here to promote your film. I asked you questions about the film and about your credibility to make a film about truth-telling. That's journalism, George. George shakes his head vigorously. He says, no, Joy. Journalism is asking tough questions in good faith, trying to understand someone's perspective. What you did was come in with a predetermined narrative that I'm a hypocrite, and then you twisted everything I said to fit that narrative. You weren't listening to my answers. You were just waiting for your next attack. Alyssa tries again. She says, I think we're all getting heated here, and maybe we should acknowledge that both of you have valid points. George turns to her and says, with all due respect, Alyssa, no, this isn't a both sides situation. I came here in good faith, and I was attacked from the moment I sat down. Joy was planning this. Look at her notes. I guarantee you she has a whole list of gotcha questions written down. Joy doesn't deny it. Instead, she says, of course I prepared questions. That's my job. George says, there's a difference between preparing questions and preparing an attack. You know that, Joy. The tension somehow manages to escalate even further when Joy says, Fine. You want to know the truth? I think you're a hypocrite, George. I think you pick easy causes that make you look good and avoid anything that might cost you money or fans. I think you hide behind your charm and your movies and your so-called private charity work because you don't actually have the courage to take real stands on difficult issues. I think you're more concerned with your image than with actually making a difference. And I think your film about journalistic courage is ironic because you don't have any courage yourself. The studio goes completely silent. Even the crew has stopped moving. George stares at Joy for what feels like an eternity. When he finally speaks, his voice is barely above a whisper, but it's more powerful than any shout. He says, "You don't know anything about courage, Joy. You sit here in your comfortable studio with your comfortable job, surrounded by security and producers and lawyers, and you think asking rude questions makes you brave. You've never put yourself on the line for anything. You've never risked anything real. Courage isn't making accusations on television. Courage is doing the right thing when no one is watching, when there's no applause, when it might actually cost you something." Joy's hands are shaking now. She says, "I have risked things, George. I've been threatened. I've been protested. I've had my family harassed because of positions I've taken on this show." George's expression doesn't soften. He says, "And I'm sorry that happened to you, truly. But it doesn't give you the right to attack people who are trying to do good in the world just because they don't do it the exact way you want them to. The world is complicated, Joy. Solutions are complicated. And purity tests help no one." Joy fires back. "This isn't a purity test. This is accountability." George says, "No, this is you trying to tear someone down to make yourself feel righteous. There's a difference. Whoopi has had enough." She says loudly, "We are going to commercial right now. George, Joy, both of you need to step away from the table." But before anyone can move, Joy says one more thing. She says, "If you walk off this set, George, everyone is going to know exactly who you really are." George picks up his jacket from the back of his chair. He says, "Joy, I stopped caring what people like you think about me a long time ago. I know who I am. My family knows who I am. The people I've helped know who I am. And that's enough." He starts walking toward the exit. And this time, no one stops him. But Joy isn't done. As George reaches the edge of the set, she calls out loudly, "That's right, George. Run away. Just like you run away from every difficult conversation. Just like you run away from real accountability." George stops walking but doesn't turn around immediately. His shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. The audience is completely silent, watching this unfold like a car crash they can't look away from. Finally, George turns around slowly. His face is calm now, almost eerily so. He walks back toward the table, and everyone tenses up. But instead of yelling, he speaks in a measured, deliberate tone. He says, "You really want to do this, Joy? You really want to have this conversation right here, right now, in front of all these people?" Joy lifts her chin defiantly. She says, "I've been trying to have this conversation for the past 20 minutes, George. You're the one who keeps threatening to leave." George nods slowly. He says, "Okay, fine. Let's talk about accountability. Let's talk about courage. Let's talk about what it really means to use your platform. You want to know why I don't comment on every single issue that comes across my desk? Because I actually do my homework first. Because I talk to experts. Because I visit places and meet people and try to understand the full scope of a problem before I open my mouth. What do, Joy? You read some headlines, talk to your producers, and then spout off whatever hot take will get the most attention that day." Joy's face contorts with anger. She says, "That's not fair, and you know it. We research our topics extensively on this show." George raises his eyebrows. He says, "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you had your mind made up about me before I even walked through that door. You didn't ask me questions to learn anything. You asked questions to confirm what you already believed. That's not research, Joy. That's bias." Joy slams her palm on the table again. She says, "I am not biased. I am holding you to the same standard I hold everyone to." George says sharply, "No, you're holding me to an impossible standard. You want me to be an expert on every issue, to have a perfect take on every crisis, to never be silent about anything. That's not realistic for anyone, including you." Whoopi tries once more to regain control. She says, "George has a point, Joy. We can disagree with someone's approach without questioning their entire character." But Joy waves her off dismissively. She says, "Stay out of this, Whoopi. George and I are having a conversation." Whoopi's face hardens. She says, "No, Joy. You're having an attack. There's a difference. This is my show, too, and I'm not going to sit here and watch you destroy a guest because you've decided to make an example out of him. Joy turns on Whoopi now. She says, "Oh, so you're defending him? Of course you are. You Hollywood people always stick together." Whoopi stands up, her voice firm. She says, "This has nothing to do with Hollywood. This has to do with basic respect and professionalism. You crossed a line when you brought his wife into this, and you're continuing to cross lines right now." The other hosts look deeply uncomfortable. Sunny tries to speak, but seems unsure what to say. Sarah looks like she wants to disappear. The audience is shifting in their seats, some people whispering to each other. George watches this unfold and then says, "You know what? The saddest part of all this is Joy. We probably agree on 90% of the issues. We probably want the same things for the world. But instead of having a real conversation, instead of maybe finding common ground, or even respectfully disagreeing, you chose to make this personal. You chose to attack my character, my marriage, my integrity. And for what? For ratings, for a viral moment." Joy's voice cracks slightly when she responds. She says, "I chose to hold you accountable, George. That's my job." George shakes his head. He says, "No, your job is to have conversations. Your job is to inform your audience. Your job is to create dialogue, not destroy it. What you did today wasn't accountability. It was a performance, and not a very good one." Joy's eyes well up slightly, but her voice remains hard. She says, "You have no idea what kind of pressure I'm under. You have no idea what it's like to do this show day after day. To always have to be on, to always have to ask the tough questions, because if I don't, people say I'm going soft." George's expression softens just slightly. He says, "Then maybe the problem isn't me, Joy. Maybe the problem is that you're in an environment that rewards cruelty over curiosity. Maybe the problem is that television has become so obsessed with conflict that actual conversation is seen as boring. I feel for you if that's the position you're in, but it doesn't excuse what you did here today." Joy wipes at her eyes quickly. She says, "I don't need your pity, George." George says quietly, "It's not pity. It's empathy. There's a difference. But empathy doesn't mean I'm going to stand here and let you tear me apart for sport." There's a long pause. The studio is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Finally, Joy says, "So, what now? You're leaving?" George nods. He says, "Yes, I'm leaving. Not because I'm running away. Not because I can't handle tough questions, but because this stopped being an interview about 20 minutes ago. This became something ugly, and I don't participate in ugly." Joy says, "The audience deserves to hear you defend yourself." George looks at the audience and then back at Joy. He says, "I don't need to defend myself to people who have already decided I'm guilty. That's a rigged game, and I'm not playing it." He turns to Whoopi and the other hosts. He says, "Whoopi, I respect you. I've always respected you. I'm sorry this happened on your show." Whoopi nods, looking genuinely upset. She says, "I'm sorry too, George. This isn't what we wanted." George says, "I know." Then he looks at the audience. He says, "To everyone watching, I hope you'll actually go see the film. It's about the importance of asking difficult questions in pursuit of truth. But it's also about doing that with integrity and fairness. I hope that message comes through. And I hope all of you will think about the difference between holding people accountable and just tearing them down." Joy stands abruptly. She says, "So that's it? You get the last word and you walk away?" George looks at her one final time. He says, "Joy, you've had plenty of words today. You've said everything you wanted to say, and then some. I'm not trying to win this argument. I'm just trying to leave with my dignity intact." Joy says, "Your dignity wasn't under attack until you started acting like you were above being questioned." George's jaw clenches. He says, "There's that word again, questioned. You keep using it like it justifies everything you did. But questioning someone and attacking someone are not the same thing. And deep down, you know that." Whoopi stands between them again and says, "George, the exit is this way. Let me walk you out." George nods gratefully. As they start to walk away, Joy calls out one more time. She says, "You know what, George? I think you're scared. I think you're scared that if people really looked at your record, really examined your choices, they'd see through the carefully crafted image. I think that's why you're running." George stops walking. He doesn't turn around this time. He just says over his shoulder, "I'm not running, Joy. I'm choosing. I'm choosing not to engage with someone who has no interest in good faith dialogue. I'm choosing my peace over your drama. I'm choosing to walk away from toxicity. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Joy shouts, it's cowardice. George finally turns around one last time, and his voice is ice cold. He says, if you genuinely believe that, then you've learned nothing from all your years in this business. You've learned nothing about people, nothing about conversation, nothing about what it actually takes to make the world better. You're just stuck in your own echo chamber, congratulating yourself for being combative and calling it courage. I feel sorry for you, Joy. I really do. Because at the end of the day, I'll go home to people who love me, to work that fulfills me, to causes that matter to me, and you'll still be here angry and bitter, wondering why people don't respect you the way you think they should. Joy's face crumples. For a moment, she looks genuinely hurt, but then her expression hardens again. She says, get out. Just get out of here, George. George says, I was already leaving, Joy. You just couldn't let me go without getting in one more shot. That says everything anyone needs to know. He walks toward the exit with Whoopi beside him. The cameras follow them for a moment, and you can hear Whoopi saying quietly, I'm so sorry, George. That was completely out of line. George says something back that the microphones don't quite pick up, but his body language is tense. Back at the table, Joy sits down heavily. The other hosts look at each other, clearly unsure what to say or do. Sarah finally says, should we go to commercial? Joy ignores her. She's staring at the spot where George was standing, her face unreadable. Sunny says gently, Joy, are you okay? Joy snaps, I'm fine. He's the one who couldn't handle a real conversation. Alyssa says carefully, I think maybe it got a little more heated than it needed to. Joy turns on her. She says, whose side are you on, Alyssa? Alyssa holds up her hands. She says, I'm not on anyone's side. I'm just saying that bringing up his wife was probably not the best move. Joy's voice rises again. She says, I stand by every single thing I said, every single question I asked. He came on this show as a public figure promoting a film about accountability, and I held him accountable. If he couldn't handle that, that's his problem, not mine. Whoopi returns to the set and sits down heavily. She looks exhausted. She says, Joy, we need to talk about what just happened. Joy says defensively, what's there to talk about? I did my job. Whoopi says, your job isn't to drive guests off the set. Your job isn't to make personal attacks. Joy says, I didn't make personal attacks. I asked legitimate questions. Whoopi shakes her head. She says, you brought up his wife, Joy. That was personal. That was over the line. Joy crosses her arms. She says, his wife is a public figure. Whoopi says, his wife wasn't here. His wife isn't promoting a movie. His wife had nothing to do with this interview until you dragged her into it. There's a long, tense silence. Finally, the director's voice comes through someone's earpiece, and Whoopi looks up. She says to the camera, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our show. The cameras cut, and the audience starts murmuring loudly. Some people are taking out their phones, clearly already texting or posting about what they just witnessed. The energy in the room is electric and uncomfortable all at once. As the commercial break runs, you can see Joy and Whoopi having an intense, quiet conversation at the table. Joy is gesticulating, clearly defending herself. Whoopi is shaking her head, looking disappointed. The other hosts are talking amongst themselves, occasionally glancing over at Joy and Whoopi. When the show comes back from commercial, Whoopi addresses the camera alone. She says, as you all just saw, we had an unexpected turn in our interview with George Clooney today. I want to say on behalf of the show that we strive for respectful dialogue here, even when we disagree with our guests. What happened today was not reflective of our values or our usual standards. We hope you'll continue to watch and support the show. Joy is no longer at the table. The camera doesn't explain where she went, and Whoopi doesn't address it. The show continues with the remaining hosts looking uncomfortable and trying to move forward with their planned segments. But everyone knows that this moment, this confrontation, is what people are going to remember. This is what's going to be talked about for days, maybe weeks. The interview that went so wrong that one of the biggest movie stars in the world walked off the set, and one of the show's longtime hosts disappeared mid-broadcast. So, what do you think about everything that just happened? Was Joy right to push George as hard as she did? Or did she cross the line? Do celebrities have a responsibility to speak out on every issue? Or is it okay to be selective? And when does holding someone accountable turn into just attacking them? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any more stories like this one. What would you do if you were in George's position? Would you have stayed and finished the interview, or would you have walked out too? Let us know in the comments.